China's big week, 3 satellites on 2 rockets into orbit. NASA's contamination guidelines protecting Earth and our planets from spreading germs. And it's opposition time. Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter and Saturn all lined up for some awesome astronomy nights. It's Saturday, July 18, 2020. This is Talkin Science live and uncut all across Trekzone. I'm Matt Miller. Let's get into it.
With the latest science and space news 5 days a week across Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts and YouTube. This is Talkin Science with Dr. Brad Tucker and Matt Miller.
And now it's a very exciting Talkin Science Saturday with Dr. Brad Tucker. Brad, happy Saturday.
It's Saturdays or Tuesdays, just 5 days removed.
Well, it's part of the ever-expanding lineup of Trekzone podcasts. We've been doing it for a few weeks now, going live and producing the uncut edition of the show because there's so much to talk about, and we talk for so long that I can break it up into 5 shows, which is very cool.
Look, having enough content is not a problem we have. It's a good thing to have, I guess.
It absolutely is. And of course, Brad's all over social media. On Facebook, Dr. Brad Tucker. On Twitter, BTucker22. Trekzone's all over social media as well. Just search for Trekzone. And I'm on Twitter at Miramat86. Brad, let's dive in.
Talking Science headlines.
Alrighty, Brad, into the headlines of the week, and it's a busy time for Mars missions. Well, it's not busy for the Red Planet yet, but it certainly is going to be. In the next few weeks, the United Arab Emirates, the USA, and China are launching missions to the Red Planet.
Yeah, there's going to be a bit of a traffic jam getting to Mars, to be honest. The UAE's getting a ride on a Japanese rocket. China's launching their own rover, and US will go on an Atlas 5, I think. Perseverance launching a rover to Mars. It could have been even busier with the European Rosalind Franklin rover getting there, but as we talked about a few months ago, that was delayed partly due to coronavirus, so it won't make the trip. They'll have to wait. They'll have to watch its friends make the trip for it.
In one regard, I feel for our friend Glenn Nagel at the Tidbit Bella tracking station, who's going to have to keep an eye on all of these things and get all of their transmissions back to the respective mission controls.
Lots of things to monitor and go, and yes, mostly things shouldn't happen in between leaving and getting there, but things can happen, and then as they start to kind of park, it's like planes, right? Busy at takeoff and landing, and when you're cruising, hopefully it's smooth sailing, but you still have to pay attention, still work to be done.
It is 2020 after all.
That's right, exactly.
Something that came up overnight, it is the 45th anniversary of the Apollo-Soyuz docking. Such a historic moment in space travel.
An important part of cooperation in terms of the US and Russia, and in the height of the Cold War, working together to move space, and directly led to a decade later the planning for the International Space Station, which now is a big part of space exploration. And because of that initial movement during the Apollo-Soyuz showed that it could work, and they were stronger together.
Talking Science, stories of the week.
And Brad, first up for our stories of the week, China's had a big week. 3 satellites launched on 2 rockets.
China is a growing space power, so to speak, as we've talked about. And this period just goes to how quickly they can turn around missions, both building the satellites, getting the rockets prepped, the range, I guess, of offering, so to speak, the different types of rockets they can have, and their willingness to invest quickly and efficiently in the growing space sector, not just for practical reasons, but space exploration. And this kind of period just shows, they're really kind of taking it seriously, that they are walking the walk, so to speak.
Part of these missions are to build the Chinese space station. They're not allowed on the International Space Station, so they're building their own. They're striking it out on their own.
That's right. They have a very ambitious goal of building their own space station, and it's partially to show that they can. Even though the Russians and Americans have, worked together on the International Space Station with other countries, they still both built their own first. There was Mir, there was Skylab. This allows China more flexibility, their own interests and, science and those sorts of things. Again, it's to show and put them on par with the US and Russia that they can kind of do everything they do. And as we talked about in the highlights, also launching a mission to Mars as well. It's showing that they are just as powerful isn't the right word, but as advanced and willing to do the things in space, again, both for practical terms, but also space exploration. And they're taking it seriously.
And two of the satellites from the China Academy of Space Technology flew into orbit on a Long March 4B. One of those satellites on board was called Gaofen, billed by the Chinese media as a remote sensing satellite. With a resolution of about 3 feet, it's been placed in a sun-synchronous orbit. What exactly is a sun-synchronous orbit, Brad?
A resolution of about 1 meter is on par with some of the other satellites that we have. It isn't the highest resolution Earth observation satellite, but in terms of a lot of ones we use, and that sun-synchronous being in the point where you're always appearing over your area during the daytime. So this is the key for an Earth observation satellite, is you want to look at Earth, or at least the part of Earth, during the daytime so you can see. Unlike astronomy satellites, we want it dark. You want the opposite. And so by being in a sun-synchronous orbit, it means that it's always going to be appearing over China during the daytime every day to keep taking multiple images per day in the ideal world. And so it's a very unique orbit that lots of these Earth observation satellites like to go because of their purpose of observing Earth in the daytime.
Another satellite was to popularize space science for teenagers, according to the state-run media agency, doing science experiments such as transmitting images and voice data. This one should be pretty cool and hopefully bring up the next generation of scientists.
Yeah, I really love this. You know, it's from early on engaging in education and science communication with, as you said, you know, the next round of engineers and scientists that they want in their country and the world needs for people, and building something to address that. And I think, you know, that's a very important part of their vision, is that, you know, they're not just trying to more readily access space for practical reasons like Earth observation, something lots of countries need, but then also trying to do that inspiration aspect and education aspect. And I think that's really cool. And it just really builds into the solid vision they have of growing their space sector over the next coming decades.
And the last satellite that they launched, which was on a separate launch a couple of days later, is doing some studies of the environment of space and also some related technology experiments, which some people are suggesting might be military reconnaissance.
Yeah, there's usually hints that it's some sort of military reconnaissance, which, you know, that's kind of the way it goes. Every country does that. That's not to be unexpected. You know, that's the reality of growing in space. And one of the practical reasons they are growing their space program is to also have their own capability of space surveillance, things that lots of countries not only have already but use. But, you know, as we talked about, they're kind of doing it all, and they're doing their all with heavy investment and quickly, kind of what the US and Russia were like in the 70s in that great space race. So it's really interesting to see how this plays out and where they go to from here next.
And I think also, too, Australia's invested a couple of $2 billion into our military space program. So nothing really surprising here. As you say, it's a country developing its own space agency, and these are the ways to do it.
That's right. I mean, that's what you expect. And as I said, I really like some of the moves they're doing in doing that parallel between practicalness and inspiration. I think that's key to thriving space sector. As you said, something Australia's exactly doing.
And Brad, our next story of the week is all about space contamination. NASA has unveiled some more directives. This time it's to protect the moon, Mars, but also Earth as well.
Yeah, look, no one's going to deny we need that right now. And this is something that has been in the works that they issued back when they commissioned a report a few years ago about contamination in space and our susceptibility to it. And as you said, it's both what we call forwards and backwards contamination, us going out and contaminating places and us bringing things and contaminating Earth back, and trying to show that we need to have new policies, new protocols, and kind of tighten up what we do in space exploration.
Absolutely, and there are some sample return missions already on their way back. Hayabusa 2, for example. These sort of directives are going to be on the way that we handle these samples on return.
That's right. You know, as you said, Hayabusa 2 already headed, and, you know, it will be Australia's problem, well, South Australia at least, so we don't care. Not kidding to our friends in South Australia. But it will be Australia's problem that we have to deal with in the beginning when it lands with Japan. NASA has OSIRIS-REx that will come back to Earth in 2023. Mars sample return missions, moon sample return missions. It's all planned this decade to do these things. The last thing you want is to bring back a contaminant. This sounds like a very far-fetched thing, but it's 2020, so that's completely on par with what can happen. So you don't want to have an outbreak from space. And it was quite funny. I remember talking to epidemiologists who we were looking at ways that we are going to be part of these projects and analyzing and, biosecurity, essentially, space biosecurity. And everyone's like, oh, yeah, you don't want something like contagion. And it's quite funny, isn't the right word, but quite interesting how it's happened in 2020 now with obviously COVID. You don't want something like that from space. And it sounds so far-fetched, but it's not.
Yes.
And that's the point here.
Well, and the biggest thing here with looking at how a virus from a bat has shut down the world and killed so many people. Imagine what a virus from an asteroid from the very beginning of the solar system would do to the planet.
Yeah, it's unfathomable. And not to freak people out, this is the reality of it. We know that there are things that could potentially live on asteroids and comets and the moon and Mars. And all of this is going to be on the level of bacteria or viruses or something like that. But you don't want to create something that throws off the ecosystem or, as you said, infects people or any of the other myriad disasters you can conjure up in your mind. And so it's trying to make sure we do this safely in our explorations to the best of our abilities and our best of our knowledge, because when some of these missions were planned, we didn't really know what could be on these things. But now as our knowledge has increased and our understanding that there's water in these places and the environments could sustain extremophiles, those sorts of things, we don't want to be careless in our adventuring of space and do some serious damage on these return missions.
Absolutely. And it also looks to protect what has been basically undisturbed, except for a couple of little missions in the 1960s and 70s. But it aims to protect what has been undisturbed for many millennia in the moon and Mars. And just making sure that we're going there and we're not finding human-related things on the red planet and hailing them as a big discovery.
Yeah, it's completely true. And also, you don't want to throw off their ecosystem. And when we think about it, we think of the moon as not having this and Mars, but they do. And, they could have things living on it, especially Mars. You don't want to contaminate with our Earth bugs and things. Mars already is contaminated by a robot army. We left space nappies on the surface of the moon from the Apollo missions, which that has human bacteria in it. All these little things matter. And we want to make sure that we're good stewards of our space exploration and not do anything untoward on these other objects or places, not just because, we found life, but it's actually life from Earth. But also, we don't want to destroy those places. It's not us to destroy it. So it's trying to do space as ethically as we possibly can. And that requires reevaluation and re-update of policies.
Well, Brad, it certainly is a very interesting topic and one that is good to get on top of before we start sending those missions out. Of course, probably need to get onto this for Perseverance because I believe that there's a sample return mission on that one as well.
That's exactly right. And this is kind of the what spearheaded some of these things that these missions are already in the middle of play. So we need to be on top of it and bring our A game, so to speak. If we don't act now, it may be too late. Not trying to be dramatic. That's just because we're already sending these things out and they're starting to go to these places. We need to make sure things like Perseverance or Hayabusa 2 or OSIRIS-REx or the missions planned to Titan and the moons of Jupiter and Saturn don't contaminate there or bring something back.
Alrighty, Brad, our last story of the week. Planetary opposition. Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. They're all lined up. They're all looking good. If you're watching The Fifth Element, it's a bad thing to have them in opposition, but it's a good thing for amateur astronomy.
Look, opposition's a good thing for sending missions to Mars. That's why all the missions to Mars, as we talked about in the highlights, are headed, because that means by opposition, they are kind of on the same side of the sun. The best way to think about it is, the planets are like cars going around the racetrack. You want them to be on the same side of the racetrack because that makes it closer and therefore the trip a lot quicker. And as you said, then to us, mortals on Earth, it means that they are appearing clear and bright and a little bit bigger in the skies to look at. And so it's a great chance to see these planets this month in the skies.
And you don't need anything expensive to see these planets, given how everything lines up. It's quite easy to spot them with the naked eye even.
The trick to finding planets is planets don't twinkle. So stars twinkle, and stars twinkle because of turbulence in the sky. So the same reason airplanes shake is the same reason stars twinkle. Well, planets, because there's multiple points of light coming in through our atmosphere, our eye kind of blends it together, and we don't see it as the twinkling. And at that point, then we see it as these bright, solid points of light. So if you see a bright object and it's not twinkling, the chances are it's actually a planet. And also, as you said, planets form kind of an invisible arc across the sky, what we call the ecliptic, or the plane of the solar system. And so if you have these bright, non-twinkling lights that kind of line up, especially Jupiter and Saturn, which are close to each other, it's easy to spot the planets.
And Mars has a bit of a red tinge.
Mars being the red planet kind of looks red. Just as Earth looks blue from Mars.
And where can people find these planets? At what time? Where are they looking to find these planets? Probably in the southern hemisphere for our listeners.
That's right. So, I mean, well, as all planets, they rise in the east and set in the west. So for Jupiter and Saturn, they're rising in the early evening. So that's kind of shortly after sunset. Now, so Jupiter and Saturn are visible all night. So if you wake up in the early, or if you're around in the early evening, they're in the low in the eastern sky. But because they're visible all night right now, if you wake up early, say 5:30, 6 o'clock before sunrise, they'll be low in the western sky, kind of where things are setting. Now, Mars is rising right about after midnight right now. So it's low in the eastern sky after midnight. And by the time the morning's coming around, it's kind of straight above you. Now, the other ones are Mercury and Venus. Now, Mercury and Venus are only visible in the early morning, and they'll be, again, low in the eastern skies. And Venus is that, if you go outside and see a really bright object in the eastern sky, that is Venus. That's actually why we call Venus the morning or evening star, because it's either bright and low in the eastern sky around sunrise or bright and low in the west at sunset. So it's always kind of following what the sun is doing.
And Saturn and Jupiter are in opposition yearly. Mars comes into opposition once every 2.25 years. And that really comes down to these missions that we talk about, and why it's so critical that there are these windows, because this perfect alignment doesn't happen all the time. There's specifics as to when it all occurs.
That's exactly right. And it's quite interesting with Jupiter and Saturn. As you said, right now, they're kind of just always at opposition. That's just because of how so far out they are and how long they take to orbit the sun. But it also means in 15 years, there will always not be at opposition. And as we plan things there, it could take quite a while to send these things. Now with Mars, as you said, it's about 26 months or so, roughly, for its relative opposition. And so if you miss that window, you have a much, much, much longer and just not practical trip to Mars. And it's important for Mars exploration, not just for rovers and robots and satellites and missions to Mars, but if we talk about in the future human missions to Mars, you do have these concrete windows where if you miss it or you can't do it, you have to wait till the next one, and you're kind of just endlessly chasing the Earth or Mars, vice versa, around the sun, and it just doesn't make it practical.
Brad, some awesome nighttime viewing. Around 3 to 4 a.m. is the best time to see all of this, so get to sleep early.
It's a great chance. Or, if you just are an early morning riser, you could be rewarded for once. There's a way of thinking about it that way.
Awesome, Brad. Well, another week of looking at the science and space news is all done. Let's do it again on our next Talkin Science Tuesday, which will be episode number 412.
Sounds good.